They never vanished, they just rebranded. And as for the mob, it didn't disappear. It just changed faces and kept cashing in. We romanticize the old gangsters with fedoras and fancy nicknames, but strip away the Hollywood gloss and you'll find the ugly truth. These weren't businessmen who occasionally got violent. They were violence merchants who occasionally did business. Terror wasn't their mistake, it was their method. I'm not here to glorify blood oaths or honor codes. This is about what happens when society's guardrails break, when institutions look the other way, and when brutality becomes the fastest route to power. These fear empires all follow the same pattern: meteoric rise, blinding peak, then implosion, always consuming the very men who thought themselves beyond consequences. I'm Becca, this is Deadly Truths, and you're listening to The Mob is Dead. Today, we're dissecting Alphonse Capone, Scarface himself. Let's dive in. Long before Chicago trembled at his name, Al Capone's hands were already bloody and already washed clean by those who should have cared in New York. In the raw-edged Brooklyn of the 1910s, Capone broke bones for Frankie Yale, prowling between smoke-choked bars, gambling dens, and the kind of alleys where screams get swallowed. He wasn't a boss, he wasn't a legend, he was a weapon, young, vicious, and hair-trigger volatile in ways that made veteran gangsters both use him and fear him. Before the headlines and the legends, who was Al Capone really? Born in 1899 to Italian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York, young Alphonse wasn't raised in extraordinary circumstances. The Capones lived in tenements where hallways echoed with multiple languages and children played in streets that doubled as marketplaces and occasional battlegrounds. They weren't starving, but they weren't comfortable either, just another family navigating America's promise through its indifference. When he was growing up in New York, the mythology often fixates on Capone's love of baseball. Yes, he played sandlot games like thousands of other boys, but the bat in his hands was never going to lead to Yankee Stadium. We cling to these details because we want to believe killers have origin stories with clear turning points. Capone's path wasn't a tragic detour, it was a straight line. In his early school years, Capone showed intelligence but bristled against rules and authority figures. His academic career ended in 6th grade when he punched a teacher, not just adolescent defiance, but the first public rupture between Capone and any institution demanding self-control. Nature abhors a vacuum. Brooklyn's streets rushed in to fill it. The Brooklyn of Capone's youth valued different currencies than report cards. Muscle, unwavering loyalty, and fearsome reputation paid better dividends than diplomas. Capone quickly internalized that fists resolved conflicts more efficiently than debate. He gravitated toward neighborhood gangs before catching Frankie Yale's attention. Yale, a calculating racketeer and saloon owner, had perfected the art of weaponizing angry young men. Under Yale's tutelage, Capone mastered his criminal apprenticeship, the perfect threatening stare, debt collection techniques, situational awareness, and when to turn up the heat. Yale taught pressure points, not subtlety. Unlike many of his generation, Capone never saw the trenches of World War I. As European battlefields swallowed American boys whole, he remained in New York, honing different skills, breaking arms instead of taking orders, collecting protection money while others collected dog tags. The war stories he'd later hint at were pure fiction. His education in violence came from city streets, not foreign soil. That infamous facial scar, the one that branded him Scarface for life, wasn't earned in some noble combat. One night, Capone made the mistake of telling a woman she had a nice ass. Her brother, Frank Galluccio, responded with 3 quick slashes that opened Capone's face from cheek to neck. The wound healed, but Capone's pride never did. He despised the nickname, buried the humiliating truth, and fabricated tales of battlefield injuries, revealing a man obsessed with controlling not just territory, but the very narrative of his existence. That knife wound transformed him. Every time someone's eyes flickered to his cheek, they saw a man who'd been marked, who'd crossed a line and paid for it in flesh. Capone stopped trying to be likable after that. Instead, he cultivated fear, treating his reputation like a weapon that needed constant polishing. New York grew too hot by the time he hit 23. Too many people who wanted payback. Too many cops who knew his face. Meanwhile, in Chicago, there was Torrio, and he called with an offer. It wasn't a career advancement, and it was an escape hatch that happened to lead somewhere promising. Chicago's police took deeper payoffs, its politicians asked fewer questions, and Prohibition had created a gold rush for men willing to break laws. Capone didn't create this perfect storm. He simply sailed straight into it. Remember that in New York City, the streets that shaped Capone shaped thousands of others. Yet most didn't build empires on corpses. What separated him wasn't some childhood horror or inborn evil. It was his willingness to cross lines others wouldn't. The system, with its corrupt cops and limited options for immigrant kids, provided opportunity, but Capone provided the bloodshed. Those same Brooklyn blocks produced other names America would come to fear and be taught about in mob-related history. While young Alphonse was still learning violence under Yale, figures like Luciano, Lansky, and Genovese were already carving their own territories nearby. They all breathed the same air in 5 Points, where gambling dens backed into speakeasies, where protection rackets funded loan sharks, and where ambition meant stepping over bodies whether you pulled the trigger or not. Recognition isn't alliance. Capone, Luciano, and Lansky inhabited the same underworld. Though they sometimes shared streets and even interests, their ambitions ran on different rails. Capone's education came through Yale's fists in New York, and then Torrio's calculated brutality in Chicago, a lineage that shaped his methods. Torrio, though more strategic than his protege, still embraced the old playbook: visible muscle, territorial dominance, and fear as currency. Meanwhile, Luciano and Lansky were quietly revolutionizing the game. They built networks across ethnic lines, minimized bloodshed, and designed operations that hummed without constant violence. These philosophical differences created an unbridgeable gap. Between Torrio in Chicago and Luciano in New York existed mutual professional respect. Both understood that unnecessary chaos destroyed profit margins. Yet their visions remained incompatible. Torrio constructed pyramids with himself at the apex. Luciano architected systems designed to outlast any single figure. When Capone took Torrio's throne, he inherited the kingdom but lacked the restraint, cementing the separation between Chicago's thunderous approach and New York's whispered efficiency. It is important to discuss what happened as soon as Capone got to Chicago, and that was the killing of Big Jim Colosimo. On May 11, 1920, Big Jim Colosimo straightened his silk tie and greeted the morning staff at his cafe on South Wabash. The diamond pinky ring caught the light as he waved away a waiter's concern about a delivery scheduled for the back entrance. Then the cafe manager found him sprawled beside the check room, his white collar blooming red. The cash register remained untouched. His wallet still bulged with bills. The police found a half-empty bottle of Chianti. Capone had barely unpacked his bags in Chicago, his role as Torrio's muscle still fresh. When Colosimo's body hit the floor, did Capone pull the trigger? The court records remain silent. Some witnesses swear he was in Chicago that day. Others insist he never left New York. What remains undisputed is the mathematics of power. Colosimo stood between Torrio and control of Chicago's underworld. Then Colosimo vanished, and the path cleared. The case gathered dust in police files. No serious arrests followed. The message required no translation. This clockwork immunity wasn't by chance. Chicago's police force operated on a sliding scale of blindness directly proportional to the thickness of cash passed under tables. Capone quickly grasped that visibility posed no threat when the right palms felt heavy with cash. Colosimo's murder didn't shatter Chicago's criminal ecosystem immediately. Johnny Torrio seized the opportunity to strengthen his position, expanding aggressively into bootlegging while maintaining a calculated approach to violence. This restraint proved crucial when tensions emerged with Dean O'Banion's North Side gang. O'Banion's outfit dominated the northern districts, controlling prime real estate, transportation corridors, and paid for police protection. Both organizations coveted identical assets: alcohol distribution networks, shipping lanes, and law enforcement allegiances. Such resources couldn't be divided indefinitely in a city where territorial boundaries meant everything. Initially, their competition remained business-like: supply thefts, strategic intimidation, calculated pressure. Then Capone entered the equation. Unlike Torrio, who threatened first and struck only when necessary, Capone reversed the formula. Under his influence, vengeance came quicker, boundaries were tested more aggressively, and both factions began probing for weaknesses with increasing boldness. By 1924, O'Banion had evolved from competitor to existential threat. The architecture of Chicago's liquor trade required stability: consistent distribution channels, reliable protection payments, political arrangements, and unwritten rules limiting bloodshed. O'Banion systematically undermined this ecosystem. His crews seized shipments in transit, sabotaged supply negotiations, and gradually strangled Southside profits. His word meant nothing. Any deal struck with O'Banion lasted precisely as long as it benefited him, then evaporated. Torrio viewed this through a businessman's lens. O'Banion represented market chaos. His continued existence guaranteed perpetual instability and increasing scrutiny. Eliminating him wasn't personal vengeance, but operational necessity, a calculated move to restore balance to a destabilized market. The assessment proved catastrophically flawed. On November 10th, 1924, O'Banion stood arranging chrysanthemums in his North Side flower shop when 3 men entered. He recognized them, extended his hand in greeting, and died moments later with 6 bullets in his chest. The execution was methodical, witnessed, and deliberately conspicuous. A corporate statement written in blood. Instead, it lit a fuse, and nothing went the way Torrio hoped. The North Side didn't fold. They reorganized under Jaime Weiss and made retaliation personal. In January 1925, Torrio was ambushed outside his home, shot multiple times, and left bleeding in the street. He survived, barely, and that survival mattered because Torrio understood what the hit meant. The war had crossed a line he couldn't pull it back from. Torrio had always believed violence was a tool to enforce stability, not something that should follow you home. After the shooting, he saw the future clearly: total war or total withdrawal. He chose withdrawal. Within months, Torrio stepped away from Chicago, effectively retiring and leaving the operation behind. That decision didn't end the violence. It removed the last restraint. The void left by Torrio was quickly filled by Al Capone. Unlike his mentor, Capone didn't inherit Torrio's restraint along with his empire. Torrio had viewed violence as a regrettable necessity. Capone wielded it as a business advantage. Under his direction, the conflict with the North Side gang escalated dramatically. Gunfire replaced boardroom negotiations. Public executions became press releases. O'Banion's assassination had been calculated to restore order to Chicago's underworld. The ironic result was the removal of the very men who valued that order. With Torrio's departure and Capone's ascension, Chicago's criminal ecosystem transformed. The city wasn't merely accommodating organized crime anymore, it was suffocating beneath it. Jaime Weiss was running the show for the North Side gang since O'Banion was dead. It's important to say at his time frame in Chicago's crime history, Weiss had become the most aggressive and capable leader the North Side ever produced. Now, after Dean O'Banion's murder and Johnny Torrio's retreat, Weiss believed the only way to end the war was decapitation, killing Capone himself. On the morning of September 20th, Weiss and several gunmen positioned themselves in a building across the street from the Lexington Hotel, using elevation and distance to their advantage. This wasn't a spontaneous street hit. It was planned, deliberate, and designed to catch Capone during his routine movements in and out of the hotel. When Capone appeared outside the Lexington, Weiss's crew opened fire with high-powered rifles from across the street. The gunmen weren't trying to scare him or send a message. They were trying to kill him outright. Bullets tore into the hotel facade, windows shattered, pedestrians scattered. Capone's bodyguards reacted instantly, pulling him back inside the building and returning fire. Capone escaped by seconds. Several bystanders were wounded. One man was killed. Weiss and his men fled before police could respond. Such efficiency couldn't be tolerated. In October 1926, Weiss was ambushed outside Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, a location chosen deliberately. Gunmen opened fire as he exited church, killing him in broad daylight. It was public, unmistakable, and final. The message wasn't subtle. Retaliation now followed you anywhere. Weiss's death broke the North Side's momentum. After him, leadership shifted to Bugs Moran, who was violent, but less surgical and less effective. The North Side continued fighting, but without Weiss's intensity and precision, the balance tilted decisively toward Capone. Capone tightened control over bootlegging routes, enforced loyalty with immediate consequences, and made it clear that neutrality was no longer an option. Under Torrio, disagreements could linger. Under Capone, they ended quickly. Violence became systematic. Under Capone's leadership, the organization transformed. Gone were the loose networks of enforcers. In their place stood regimented teams with clear chains of command. Decision-making flowed directly from the top, eliminating the delays that had previously hampered swift action. Fear became a business tool with predictable outcomes. First offense brought warnings, second meant broken bones, public defiance invited public consequences. Unlike his mentor, who preferred anonymity, Capone embraced the spotlight. He held court with reporters at the Lexington Hotel, posed for photographs in expensive suits, and attended boxing matches where crowds parted before him. His name appeared in headlines while his face adorned front pages. Where Torrio had cultivated invisibility, Capone constructed inevitability. That gamble paid off at first. But the old guard was gone, and now Capone was at odds with a man called Bugs Moran. The war with the North Side intensified immediately. With Torrio gone, there was no longer any attempt at restraint or compromise. The North Side, now led by Bugs Moran, matched Capone's aggression with their own, and Chicago entered its most violent stretch of the Prohibition era. Shootings increased, bombings became more frequent, and civilians were caught in the margins. Capone's logic was simple: overwhelm rivals faster than law enforcement could react, and make the cost of opposing him unbearable. It worked in the short term. His organization grew richer, his territory expanded, and his reputation hardened into something mythic. But the trade-off was baked in. Capone's transformation of intimidation into corporate policy and violence into public relations eroded the protective barriers Torrio had meticulously constructed. Headlines across America now carried his name. Washington officials began assembling files. Politicians who once accepted envelopes now avoided phone calls. His territorial expansion came at the cost of his invisibility. The equation had fundamentally changed. As the decade waned, Chicago's underworld had cannibalized its own hierarchy. The soil of the Windy City had swallowed O'Banion. Weiss lay beneath cemetery marble. Torrio had vanished into comfortable exile. All that remained was a precarious equilibrium between Capone and Moran, a situation neither man could sustain indefinitely. Moran wasn't as effective as Weiss, but he was unpredictable and persistent. He continued hijacking shipments, attacking distribution points, and surviving attempts on his life. From Capone's perspective, Moran represented unfinished business and ongoing exposure. The war couldn't end while Moran was still operating, and conventional retaliation had failed to remove him. So Capone escalated method. On the morning of February 14, 1929, a group of men connected to the North Side operation gathered inside a garage at 2122 North Clark Street in Chicago. The space doubled as a storage and distribution point, routine, familiar, unremarkable. They were there because they believed a discounted liquor shipment was coming in. Nothing about the setup felt unusual. Shortly after 10:30 a.m., a car pulled up outside the garage. Several men got out. 2 wore police uniforms. The others were dressed in plain clothes. In Prohibition-era Chicago, that combination didn't raise alarms. Police raids were common, and most people in the bootlegging business knew the routine: stand still, hands up, wait it out. The men inside the garage found themselves facing the wall, hands raised. They complied without resistance, believing this to be a routine police matter, perhaps an arrest, perhaps just another shakedown requiring the usual payoff. This misreading of the situation sealed their fate. The uniformed officers stepped to the sides. Their plainclothes companions raised Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. The execution proceeded with mechanical precision. No wild spray of bullets, no shouting, just the methodical discharge of weapons at point-blank range. The gunmen fired in controlled bursts until the concrete floor held 7 bodies in various stages of death. A single victim gasped his final breaths while blood pooled beneath him. Nearby, a dog tied to a truck's bumper survived, its howls cutting through the gun smoke and drawing neighbors' attention. With the killing complete, the executioners arranged their departure. The 2 men in police uniforms marched the plainclothes gunmen out at gunpoint, a final act in their blood theater. Neighbors froze on sidewalks, averting their eyes from what appeared to be just another raid in a city drowning in raids. Sometime that afternoon, when real officers stormed through the garage door, they found only corpses cooling in February air and bullet casings still warm to the touch. Bugs Moran should have been among the dead. He turned the corner, seen what looked like cops, and retreated into the bitter wind. Those heartbeats of hesitation saved him while his men's blood soaked into concrete. The massacre remains officially unsolved, its evidence a deliberate maze, leading investigators in circles. The progression was clear in retrospect. O'Banion's murder had shattered the gentleman's agreements. Weiss's public execution had erased the shadows criminals once required. Torrio's departure had removed the last voice of moderation. Now 7 bodies on a garage floor forced a nation to confront what it had been ignoring. The massacre didn't end Capone's reign because it failed. It ended it because it worked so perfectly that America couldn't look away. The massacre reverberated beyond Chicago's city limits. Newspapers across America printed those garage wall photographs. 7 bodies slumped in final postures, blood pooling beneath them. The public that had tolerated gang warfare as a distant problem now confronted its reality on their breakfast tables. This wasn't bootleggers settling scores in back alleys anymore. This was execution in broad daylight. Police commissioners who had looked the other way now faced questions from Washington. Federal agencies that had previously respected jurisdictional boundaries began assembling task forces. Whether or not Capone intended the massacre to be decisive, the result was clear. Moran's North Side operation never recovered. Yet, in this perfect success lay the seeds of destruction. By solving his local problem so completely, Capone created a national one. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre didn't fail Capone. It succeeded so spectacularly that America could no longer pretend he was just Chicago's concern. By February 15th, Capone had traded his local immunity for national notoriety. The federal spotlight had turned, and no amount of Chicago insulation could block its beam. In the bloody aftermath of Valentine's Day, investigators faced an impossible equation. Every cop and citizen in Chicago knew Capone had orchestrated the killings. The problem wasn't knowledge, it was evidence. The crime scene itself was a masterclass. in legal evasion. Police uniforms on the gunmen created confusion among witnesses. The victims' corpses couldn't testify. The perpetrators disappeared into Chicago's labyrinth. Machine guns left ballistic signatures, but in a city flooded with Thompson submachine guns, tracing ownership was futile. Meanwhile, Capone lounged 1,300 miles away in Miami, sipping cocktails in plain view of dozens of witnesses. His absence wasn't coincidental. It was calculated armor. No eyewitness testimony connected him to Clark Street. No paper trail led to his hand. No lieutenant broke ranks to testify, their loyalty cemented by the twin pillars of Capone's leadership: generous payoffs and lethal consequences. What should be understood is the Chicago Police Department had become Capone's second payroll. Officers, judges, and local officials had been bought, threatened, or compromised beyond salvation. Any prosecution at the municipal or state level would have disintegrated before the first witness took the stand. Federal prosecutors understood the equation. They could identify the architect of the massacre, but couldn't prove it in any courtroom. This realization forced a tactical shift. Rather than pursuing Capone for the blood he'd spilled, they targeted him for the money he'd collected. His lifestyle, the custom suits, hotel penthouses, motorcades, and personal security created a financial footprint that contradicted his tax filings. Murder could be obscured, but luxury left receipts. The Treasury Department didn't require reluctant witnesses to violence. They needed bank statements. Federal agents meticulously traced Capone's empire backward, from racetrack profits to speakeasy revenues, from property holdings to daily expenditures. Their case wasn't built on testimony from gangsters or intimidated patrolmen. It rested on ledgers, financial records, and accountants whose testimony about numbers couldn't be silenced with Chicago methods. This approach was elegantly simple. Murder investigations collapsed when witnesses disappeared. Tax investigations thrived when defendants remained conspicuously wealthy. By 1931, federal prosecutors had reframed the entire case against Capone. They didn't charge the man who orchestrated the Valentine's Day massacre with murder. They charged a citizen who hadn't paid his taxes. The bloodshed that built his reputation became legally meaningless. Only the money mattered now. The conviction carried a message beyond its verdict: 11 years in federal prison, substantial fines, and back taxes that stripped away his fortune. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was designed to extract Capone from Chicago like a surgeon removing a tumor. His first stop was Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where old habits persisted. Guards accepted bribes, special privileges materialized. The walls contained his body but not his influence. So, in 1934, the government transferred him to Alcatraz, an island fortress engineered specifically to neutralize men like Capone. On the Rock, prisoner AZ-85 discovered what it meant to be truly powerless. No connections, no exceptions, no escape. The transformation was stark. The Chicago kingpin who had ruled through fear now lived in it. His health crumbled. His mind deteriorated. The intimidation tactics that had built his empire meant nothing in a cell where nobody cared who he used to be. When Capone finally left prison, he wasn't a fallen emperor. He was a shell, neurologically damaged, physically weakened, and irreversibly separated from the world he once controlled. Capone spent his final years in Florida, his mind ravaged by untreated syphilis, dying in 1947, long after his power was gone. The mythology around Al Capone splits into two simplistic narratives: mastermind strategist or bloodthirsty monster. Reality resists such convenient categorization. Popular culture has trained us to casually diagnose historical figures with clinical terms like psychopath, but that approach substitutes armchair psychology for actual understanding. Instead, we must examine the evidence. From what his contemporaries and case files reveal, Capone's psychology is best understood as Capone's documented responses to threats. his exercise of authority, his relationships with friends and enemies, and the evolution of his behavior across changing circumstances. This creates something more valuable than a retroactive diagnosis. It builds a behavioral framework that helps us understand the man without pretending to be his psychiatrist. Capone showed clear antisocial patterns early: impulsivity, aggression, poor frustration, tolerance, and a willingness to violate social norms without remorse when it benefited him. Violence wasn't a last resort, it was a learned shortcut. From New York onward, he discovered that intimidation solved problems faster than negotiation, and crucially, that it carried few immediate consequences. That's not insanity, it's conditioning. What often gets missed is how status sensitive he was. Capone craved respect but feared humiliation. The facial scar wasn't just cosmetic, it became a psychological trigger. He hated the nickname Scarface, tried to reframe the injury as a war wound, and grew increasingly obsessed with controlling how he was perceived. That kind of image management points to deep insecurity layered under bravado. Unlike figures such as Luciano or Lansky, Capone never fully trusted systems. He trusted people he could dominate. That's why fear became his preferred management style. Fear doesn't require patience, compromise, or emotional regulation. It just requires escalation. And escalation is exactly what Capone defaulted to whenever he felt challenged. As boss, his behavior shows classic signs of power-reinforced narcissism, grandiosity, entitlement, and a belief that rules applied to others. The celebrity persona wasn't accidental. It fed his self-image and insulated him psychologically from doubt. As long as he was visible and feared, he felt real. The clearest view of Capone emerges when we place him alongside his contemporaries, Luciano and Meyer Lansky. Consider their psychological blueprints. Capone's empire required constant displays of dominance, the public beatings, the newspaper interviews, the visible motorcades. When someone challenged him, he escalated immediately. His need for external validation meant he couldn't tolerate being disrespected. Power for Capone was something others had to witness for it to feel real. Luciano operated differently. He cultivated patience, worked through intermediaries, and built systems rather than spectacles. He didn't need to be the most feared man in the room. He needed to be unavoidable in the shadows. His calculated approach to violence and comfort with delayed outcomes revealed a psychological infrastructure Capone never developed. Lansky took this even further. He avoided the spotlight entirely, focusing on financial architecture over personal reputation. He built networks that functioned whether he was present or not. His power came from strategic invisibility, not intimidation. Their fates followed these patterns precisely. Capone flamed out spectacularly. Luciano adapted even in exile. Lansky lived to old age largely untouched. This wasn't coincidence, but psychological inevitability. When prison walls cut Capone off from his audience, his identity collapsed. Luciano and Lansky had built themselves differently. Their sense of self didn't require daily demonstrations of dominance, making them far more resilient when circumstances changed. That concludes today's episode of The Mob is Dead on Deadly Truths with Becca. If you've gained insight into the mechanics of power, the normalization of violence, and its inevitable self-destruction, consider sharing this episode, following the show, and leaving a review. Your support connects these narratives with others seeking substance beyond the mythology. For those interested in Capone's complete downfall, his Alcatraz confinement, the ravages of untreated syphilis, and the quiet dissolution of Chicago's former kingpin, the full story awaits on my podcast. Find Deadly Truths with Becca on any podcast platform. I'm deeply grateful to my regular listeners whose engagement and support make this independent research possible. You value historical context, accountability, and unvarnished reality. The truth remains alive, just obscured beneath layers of legend, waiting for someone willing to excavate it.